You watch an animal mature from egg to animal and go, whoa, that's a hell of an algorithm that generated that thing. You go back to the very beginning, like, what was the algorithm in that egg? The very rough version of my argument is if you step back and look at the history of life on Earth in time lapse, it actually looks more than you might think like the development of a single organism, as if we are building a planetary superorganism.
I looked through your book, Why Buddhism is True, and I found it very interesting what you say about perception.
When we perceive the world, we impose all these essences on things. Friend, enemy, good person, bad person. Meditation can erode some of these cognitive biases. And I think AI really crystallizes the challenge.
What would you, as an academic, maybe recommend that these big superpowers do about AI?
Well, first of all, I would say
AI is, at least in my opinion, Ollie might disagree with me, for me, something that we should be worried about. What would you, as an academic, maybe recommend that these big superpowers do about AI? Because obviously, no one can know for sure where it's going to go. You don't want China to take the lead necessarily. What would you recommend?
Well, first of all, I would say, I think in a way too much emphasis is being put on the sci-fi superintelligence,
Sure.
AI chooses to squash us all scenario. Sure. I'm agnostic on it's not impossible in the distant future, but I think they're much more near-term threats. Just sheer destabilization, You add the effect on the job market to the things that bad actors can do with it, to the unforeseeable, in a way, consequences of people just coming to rely on AIs for personal companionship, counseling, guidance. I mean, in some cases that'll be good, but as our experience with social media shows us, never assume that algorithms emanating from capitalism are going to be pure good. So I would say, first of all, if we could just slow things down a little, that would be great, because it would give us more time to adjust, adapt, figure out what we need to do. And it's, as you alluded to, it's actually very hard to slow things down so long as you're worried about what's going on in China. Like any arms race dynamic, whether among corporations, unregulated among corporations, or between nations, is going to make it very hard to legislate any kind of slowdown. I'll give you an example. One thing I think some reasonable people are saying is that, okay, already some of the, pretty advanced models have gone open source. And that's okay for now. We're learning a lot. But if you look at the next generation, the kind of GPT-5 or whatever, we might want to think about making sure that those aren't open source, which would mean legislation saying that what Facebook has done is no longer legal. But again, that has to be international legislation, or you're not going to get it done. There has to be some degree of international regulation. That sounds hopeless right now. But why does it sound hopeless? Because we're in a Cold War with China that didn't have to happen. It's not in our interest. It's not in China's interest. It just happened. What's happening in Russia, in Ukraine, isn't good for Russia, isn't good for Ukraine. They're dying in extremely large numbers. This is true of these conflicts generally. They're not like someone winning a zero-sum game. They're two parties losing a non-zero-sum game. That means it's like not rational. We shouldn't be proud of it. And if we don't get better at heading these things off, I don't think we can handle the AI challenge. The last thing I say is, at a minimum, when you hear someone say, "Oh, we can't do this because that will stifle innovation in AI," that's not a good objection. Stifling innovation just may be a feature and not a bug, okay? Slower is probably better. Things are moving very fast, and I think people are starting to wake up to that. I think they're going to be a lot more awakened within a year or two.
Just because we're using the concept quite a lot, and also because it links back to AI here in terms of constantly developing complexity and sophistication. Would you mind just quickly explaining for our listeners the concept of the non-zero sum game and then how you apply that to deterministic progress and evolution with humans?
Yeah. So, a zero sum game is one in which not just is there a winner or a loser, but like everything in the game is good for one player exactly to the extent that it's bad for the other. So if you're playing tennis, the outcome of every exchange is good by 1 point for one side and bad by 1 point for the other. Now, if you're playing doubles tennis, your relationship to the person on your side of the net is entirely non-zero sum. Every point is either good for both of you or bad for both of you. That's a purely like non-zero sum game. In real life, most relationships are combinations of non-zero sum and zero sum. You and a friend help each other out in certain contexts, but you have a crush on the same, love interest or something. You may, or you want the same position on the basketball team or whatever. There are elements of rivalry. That's zero sum. Only one person is going to get that position on the basketball team. So, or with bargaining, like, if you buy a car, it means that you would rather have the car than the money you paid. The merchant would rather have the money than the car. That's not zero sum. But before you get the car, there's a bargaining phase where, somewhere between the most you're willing to pay and the least the dealer is willing to accept, between those two things, it's entirely zero sum, the bargaining. So anyway, life is a combination of non-zero sum and zero sum. The argument in my book, Non-Zero, was that you can describe both biological evolution and human cultural evolution, by which I mean the evolution of everything that's not genes in a way. I mean, music, religion, law, science, all information transmitted by humans that's non-genetic. Both of these kinds of evolution, and of course cultural evolution, has entailed this growth in the complexity of social structure, the depth and scope, and that's why we have a globalized society. And I argue you can analyze both. If you ask why did biological evolution create more and more complex organisms until you finally had one that was smart enough to launch cultural evolution, and then why did cultural evolution have the kind of direction it had, toward the growth of more complex social structure? You can really describe both of them as, kind of growth in the expanse of non-zero sum relationships, although driven often by zero sum dynamics. And I think more and more over time in evolution, the importance of kind of non-zero sum relationships has become recognized. And to get back to the very beginning of the conversation, one of the, I think, important lessons of evolutionary psychology is that the human brain is designed to navigate a landscape of zero sum and non-zero sum relationships. That's what a hunter-gatherer society has. And that really accounts for a lot of our psychology, including our moral psychology, our cognitive biases, the intuition that good deeds should be rewarded and bad deeds should be punished. And that's not just an intuition of like vengeance. I want my vengeance. It's a more refined sense that if you just hear about a case where somebody was assaulted, and then you hear that the person who assaulted them was caught and punished, you kind of feel better because you have this intuition that's a good thing. So all of these things, I think you can only understand both the promise of human psychology and the great things about it and the downside of it by understanding that it was designed to play zero sum and non-zero sum games. And that the kind we play today are not the same kind we were playing when it was designed. Like there weren't nuclear bombs then, for example.
So correct me if I'm wrong before I move it onto AI, but essentially there's a favoring overall and a movement in the direction of almost or perhaps deterministically towards non-zero sum. as in benefit for everyone, and therefore towards increasing complexity and sophistication on both sides. And that's what kind of leads to the intelligence and development of humans.
Well, I mean, I would say, first of all, as far as cultural, social evolution goes, the driver of the growth in social complexity, in the depth and expanse of social complexity, is that new technologies come along that either facilitate or otherwise encourage the playing of non-zero-sum games involving more and more people at greater distances. Although a lot of that is driven by zero-sum competition among groups, basically zero-sum competition, even though strictly speaking it rarely is purely that. And that, in evolution, in a certain sense, yes. I mean, the development of a complex organism is the development through evolution of an organism whose various cells are playing a kind of non-zero-sum game with one another to win-win, outcome. It's a classic case of like they're all in the same vehicle, they will thrive together or perish together. I mean, it's a lot more complicated than that. Cells die and so on. And in a certain sense, strictly speaking, it's more like the information embedded in the DNA is it's like the non-zero-sum game is kind of being played at that level. The ultimate winner is the pattern of information in the DNA, but that is incarnated in. But the way it wins is by orchestrating cooperative behavior among a whole bunch of cells containing it. I don't know. Maybe we're probably getting a little too.
No. Well, yeah, I mean, we're not scientists, but as in Lucas and I. But the reason I was going to link it back was to ask, in the vein of increasing complexity and sophistication, whether you think there's a sort of non-zero sum possibility with the future of AI where there can be a positive symbiotic relationship for all or most people as it develops, or whether you think with the current development it's more. You mean
a relationship between humankind and AI, or among people?
Yeah, well, I don't say relationship to mean among people. Like with AI facilitating. I don't mean to suggest that there's like some sort of personal relationship between AI and humans, but.
But I think in a way that the largest goal is to make sure that there's. I mean, if you take the sci-fi superintelligence doomer scenarios seriously, the goal, it seems to me, I mean, some people who take that seriously just want to like bomb the chip factories and stop the progress, and that seems to me like beyond hopeless. Actually stopping it. But I do think the goal, if that's a serious concern, the way to address it is to try to make sure that there remains a symbiotic relationship between the AI and humankind. In other words, they always need us. And because we're going to need them. I mean, we are becoming more reliant on AI. And I'm not even assuming that AI is sentient, has subjective experience, consciousness. I don't know. I'm agnostic on whether it will or does or whatever. But just in terms of reconciling the continued proliferation of AI with the continued proliferation and well-being of humankind, another way to say that is we want to play a non-zero-sum game with the AI to a win-win outcome. We want there to be a symbiotic relationship and not a fundamentally, well, strictly speaking, I think you'd call it a mutualistic relationship, but not a parasitic relationship where it just exploits us or like wipes us out. So certainly a non-zero-sum win-win relationship among human beings should be part of that as well.
Hey guys, I hope you're enjoying the episode. I just wanted to drop you in a word from our sponsor Manscaped. You can use the discount code LOAF to get your discount, because even a lion needs to tame its mane.
Get the Performance Package 5.0 Ultra from Manscaped now. Stay fresh with no cuts, so that your baguette leaves no crumbs.